The sun rose slowly over Stonewood, painting the morning sky in shades of pink and orange. Cynthia Rhodes stood on the small wooden dock behind her fishing hut, watching the light spread across Miller's Lake. The water was calm today, smooth as glass, reflecting the colors above like a mirror. She took a deep breath of the cool morning air and smiled. This was her favorite time of day. The world was quiet. The birds were just beginning to sing. The casaba was still asleep. It was just her and the lake, and that was exactly how she liked it. Cynthia was 66 years old, but she did not feel old. Her body was strong from years of outdoor work. Her hands were rough and weathered, marked by decades of handling ropes and nets and fishing lines. Her short gray hair was always neat under her worn baseball cap. Her blue eyes were sharp and observant, always watching the water, always reading the wind and the clouds. She walked back into her fishing hut, a small wooden building that sat right at the edge of the lake. Inside, the walls were covered with fishing equipment. Rods hung from ceiling hooks. Nets were folded in corners. Tackle boxes lined the shelves. The smell of wood and water and old rope filled the air. It was a simple place, but it was hers, and she loved it. Cynthia had owned this fishing hut for 20 years. When she first came to Stonewood, she bought it from an old fisherman named Walter who was retiring. The hut had been run down then, with holes in the roof and broken windows. But Cynthia fixed it up, working long hours with her own hands. She repaired the roof, replaced the windows, painted the walls. She turned it into a real business. Now, 20 years later, the hut was a beloved part of Stonewood. Local people came here to rent fishing equipment, to buy bait, to ask for advice about where the fish were biting. Tourists stopped by in the summer months, wanting to experience the peaceful lake. Children came with their parents to learn how to fish. Cynthia was always patient with them, always willing to teach, always happy to share her knowledge. The people of Stonewood knew Cynthia as a quiet, kind woman who loved fishing and the outdoors. They knew she had moved to their town 20 years ago, but they did not know much about her life before that. Cynthia never talked about her past. When people asked, she would smile and change the subject. "The past is the past," she would say. "I'm here now, and that's what matters." And it was true. Cynthia had built a good life in Stonewood. She had friends here. She went to community events and town festivals. She helped her neighbors when they needed it. She was part of the fabric of this small town. People respected her. They liked her. They trusted her. But what they did not know was that Cynthia Rhodes carried a heavy weight inside her heart. They did not know about the life she had left behind. They did not know about the career she had abandoned. They did not know about the tragedy that had driven her away from the ocean and into this quiet, landlocked town. They did not know about the nightmares that still woke her up sometimes in the middle of the night, sweating and trembling, hearing the sound of waves and wind and desperate voices calling for help. Cynthia pushed those thoughts away. She did that every morning. She focused on the present, on the work that needed to be done. Today was Tuesday, and Tuesdays were usually slow. She would probably have a few customers in the afternoon, but the morning was hers. She could go out on the lake and check her own fishing lines, maybe catch something for dinner. She gathered her equipment and walked back out to the dock. Her small motorboat was tied there, bobbing gently in the water. It was an old boat, but well maintained. Cynthia took good care of all her equipment. She checked the engine regularly, replaced worn parts before they broke, kept everything clean and functional. It was a habit from her old life, a discipline she could not shake even after all these years. She climbed into the boat and started the engine. It purred to life, a familiar sound that always brought her comfort. She untied the rope and pushed away from the dock, steering the boat out onto the lake. The water was so calm this morning that the boat barely made a wake. It glided across the surface smoothly, effortlessly. Miller's Lake was not a large lake, but it was beautiful. It was surrounded by trees on all sides, with the small town of Stonewood sitting on the eastern shore. The lake was about 2 miles long and 1 mile wide, deep in the center and shallow near the edges. It was home to many kinds of fish: bass, trout, perch, catfish. The fishing was good here, which was why Cynthia's business did well. She steered toward her favorite spot, a place near the western shore where the water was deep and the fish liked to gather. She had set some lines there yesterday, and now she wanted to check them. As she drove, she looked around at the lake, at the trees, at the sky. She felt peaceful here. The lake was so different from the ocean. The ocean was wild and unpredictable, vast and powerful. The lake was contained, manageable, safe. That was why she had chosen to live here. She needed safety after what had happened. She needed peace. When she reached her spot, she cut the engine and let the boat drift. She pulled in her lines one by one. The first 2 were empty, but the third had a nice base on it, about 3 pounds. She pulled it up expertly, handling it with practiced ease, removing the hook and placing the fish in her cooler. The 4th line had another base, smaller than the first. She kept it anyway. It would make a good meal. She reset the lines with fresh bait and then sat in the boat for a while, just floating on the water, watching the morning light play across the surface. This was meditation for her. This was how she kept the darkness at bay. The rhythm of the water, the warmth of the sun, the simple pleasure of being alive in this moment. It was enough. It had to be enough. After about an hour, she started the engine again and headed back to the dock. By the time she tied up the boat, it was 8 o'clock. The town was waking up now. She could hear traffic on Main Street, voices calling to each other, doors opening and closing. Another day in Stonewood was beginning. Cynthia carried her cooler into the hut and cleaned her fish at the sink in the back room. She worked efficiently, the way she did everything, wasting no motion. When she was done, she wrapped the fillets in paper and put them in the refrigerator. She would cook them tonight for dinner. She spent the rest of the morning organizing the shop. She sorted through tackle boxes, checked inventory, made a list of supplies she needed to order. Around 10 o'clock, her first customer arrived. It was Tom Harrison, a local man who came by several times a week to buy bait and chat. Tom was in his 50s, with a round belly and a friendly face. He worked at the hardware store in town and liked to fish on his lunch breaks. "Morning, Cynthia," he called as he came through the door. "Good morning, Tom," Cynthia replied, looking up from her inventory list. "The usual?" "You know me too well," Tom said with a laugh. "A box of worms and some advice on where they're biting." Cynthia smiled and went to get the bait. "The West Shore is good right now. Deep water, near those fallen trees. I got 2 nice bass there this morning." "Perfect," Tom said, taking the box. "You always know the best spots. How do you do it?" Cynthia shrugged. "Experience, I guess. You spend enough time on the water, you start to understand it." Tom paid for his bait and lingered for a few minutes, talking about his family and the weather and the upcoming town festival. Cynthia listened patiently, making appropriate comments, genuinely interested in his life. This was one of the things she liked about Stonewood. People talked to each other here. They cared about each other. It was a real community. After Tom left, a few more customers came and went. A tourist couple from the city rented fishing rods for the day. A teenage boy bought a new lure for his tackle box. An elderly woman named Margaret stopped by just to say hello and bring Cynthia some homemade cookies. Margaret lived down the street and was always doing kind things like that. "You're such a dear," Margaret said, handing over the tin of cookies. Always so helpful to everyone. The town is lucky to have you. Thank you, Margaret, Cynthia said, touched by the gesture. That's very kind of you to say. It's true, Margaret insisted. You've been part of this community for so long now. I can't imagine Stonewood without you and your little fishing shop. After Margaret left, Cynthia sat behind the counter and opened the tin of cookies. They were chocolate chip, still warm. She ate one slowly, savoring the sweetness. It was moments like this that made her life here feel real and valuable. She was not just hiding in Stonewood. She was living here. She had built something here. She mattered to these people. The afternoon passed quietly. Cynthia helped a few more customers, repaired a broken fishing rod for a regular client, and swept the floor. Around 4 o'clock, she decided to close up early. Business was slow, and she wanted to take a walk through town before dinner. She locked the door of the hut and started walking along the path that ran beside the lake. It was a beautiful summer afternoon. The temperature was warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze coming off the water. Other people were out walking too, enjoying the weather. Cynthia waved to people she knew, stopped to pet a friendly dog, paused to admire someone's garden. Stonewood was a small town, population about 3,000. It had one main street with shops and restaurants, a small library, a community center, a school, and several churches. Most of the houses were old, built 50 or 60 years ago, with big yards and front porches. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where nothing much ever happened, where life moved at a slow and steady pace. Cynthia had chosen Stonewood specifically because it was so different from her old life. Before coming here, she had lived in a coastal city, working a job that was intense and dangerous and consuming. The city had been loud and crowded and fast-paced. Her work had demanded everything from her, her time, her energy, her focus, her courage, and in the end, it had taken even more than that. It had taken her peace of mind. It had taken her sense of safety. It had taken the lives of people she cared about. She pushed those thoughts away again, focusing on the present. She turned onto Main Street and walked past the familiar shops. The bakery with its smell of fresh bread. The bookstore with its window displays. The coffee shop where she sometimes met friends. The hardware store where Tom worked. Everything was familiar and comfortable. She stopped at the small grocery store and bought supplies for dinner. Then she walked back to her cottage, a small house she rented about 3 blocks from the lake. It was a simple place with 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and a cozy living room. She had lived there for all 20 years she had been in Stonewood. The landlord, a kind older man named George, had barely raised her rent in all that time. He said she was the perfect tenant, quiet and responsible and always paying on time. Cynthia cooked herself a simple dinner, the base she had caught that morning, roasted with lemon and herbs, along with a salad and some rice. She ate at her small kitchen table, reading a book while she ate. After dinner, she washed the dishes and then settled into her favorite chair in the living room with a cup of tea. The evening light was fading outside her window. She could hear children playing somewhere down the street, their laughter carrying on the warm air. A car drove by slowly. Someone was mowing their lawn. All the ordinary sounds of a summer evening in a small town. Cynthia closed her eyes and let herself relax. These quiet evenings were precious to her. They were proof that she had escaped, that she had found peace, that she had built a new life far away from the chaos and danger of her past. But even as she sat there, peaceful and relaxed, a small part of her mind was always alert, always watching, always preparing for danger. It was a habit she could not break, a skill drilled into her by years of training and experience. She noticed the wind picking up outside. She noticed the clouds moving in from the west. She noticed the change in air pressure that signaled a possible storm. That night, as she lay in bed trying to sleep, the old nightmare came again. It always started the same way. She was on a boat in the middle of the ocean. The waves were enormous, crashing over the deck. The wind was howling. Rain was pouring down so hard she could barely see. And there were voices calling out, desperate voices screaming for help, voices she recognized, voices of people she had trained with and worked with and cared about. In the dream, she tried to reach them. She fought against the waves and the wind. She called their names, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not save them. They slipped away into the dark water, one by one, and she was left alone on the boat, screaming into the storm. She woke up suddenly, her heart pounding, her sheets damp with sweat. She sat up in bed, breathing hard, waiting for her heart to slow down. The room was dark and quiet. She was safe in her cottage in Stonewood, far from the ocean, far from that terrible night. But the memories were still there, as vivid as ever. 20 years had passed, but the pain was still fresh. The guilt was still heavy. She had been the captain that night. She had been responsible for her crew, and she had failed them. Cynthia got out of bed and walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. She stood at the window, looking out at the dark street, waiting for the panic to subside. This happened sometimes, usually once or twice a month. A bad dream would trigger all the old feelings, and she would spend the rest of the night awake, unable to sleep, haunted by memories she could not escape. She knew she should probably talk to someone about this, a therapist maybe, or a support group. But she had never done it. Talking about it would mean confronting it, and she was not ready for that. Maybe she would never be ready. So she just lived with it, managed it as best she could, and tried to focus on the good life she had built here in Stonewood. Eventually, she went back to bed and lay there until morning came. She did not sleep much, but that was okay. She had learned to function on little sleep. It was another skill from her old life that she could not seem to lose. 20 years ago, Cynthia Rhodes had been a very different person. At 46 years old, she had been at the peak of her career as a captain in the United States Coast Guard. She had spent more than 20 years in the service, working her way up from a junior officer to a position of significant responsibility and respect. The Coast Guard had been her life for more than 2 decades. She had joined when she was young, fresh out of college, drawn by a desire to serve and a love of the ocean. She had trained hard, worked harder, and proven herself again and again in a field that was still, at that time, dominated by men. She had earned her position through skill, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to saving lives. As a captain, Cynthia had been in charge of search and rescue operations along a busy stretch of coastline. Her job was to coordinate missions when boats got into trouble, when people went missing at sea, when storms threatened lives. It was demanding work, requiring quick thinking, strong leadership, and nerves of steel. Lives depended on her decisions. Every mission was high stakes. Cynthia had been good at her job. Very good. She had led dozens of successful rescues. She had saved countless lives. She had received commendations and awards. Her superiors trusted her. Her crew respected her. She had been confident in her abilities, proud of her service, and deeply committed to her mission. She had also loved the ocean itself, the power of it, the beauty of it, the endless mystery of it. She loved being out on the water, even in dangerous conditions. She loved the challenge of navigating through storms, of reading the waves and the wind, of using her knowledge and experience to keep her crew safe while they saved others. Her crew had been like a family to her. She had worked with many of them for years. They trained together, ate together, faced danger together. There was a bond between them that was hard to explain to civilians. A trust that came from knowing your life depended on the people around you, and their lives depended on you. 4 members of her crew had been particularly close to her. There was Lieutenant Michael Chen, her second in command, a brilliant tactician, and one of the bravest men she had ever known. There was Petty Officer Sarah Williams, a young woman with incredible technical skills and a fierce determination to prove herself. There was Chief Warrant Officer David Martinez, a veteran with 30 years of experience who served as the crew's moral compass and mentor. And there was Petty Officer First Class James Thompson, the youngest of the group, but already showing signs of becoming an exceptional Coast Guard officer. These 4 had been more than just colleagues to Cynthia. They had been her friends. She had attended their weddings, celebrated their promotions, comforted them through personal struggles. She knew their families. She knew their dreams. She cared about them deeply. And then came that terrible night, the night that changed everything. It had been late October, storm season on the coast. A major hurricane was moving up from the south, bringing with it massive waves and dangerous winds. All boats had been warned to stay in port, but not everyone listened. A commercial fishing vessel had gone out despite the warnings, hoping to get in one more profitable haul before the storm hit. They had miscalculated. The storm had arrived earlier than expected, and with more force than predicted. The fishing vessel had sent out a distress call. They were taking on water, their engine had failed, and they were drifting toward a rocky shore. There were 8 crew members on board. If they hit those rocks, they would all die. Cynthia and her crew had responded immediately. It was their job. It was what they had trained for. Even in terrible conditions, they did not hesitate. They took their rescue vessel out into the storm, heading toward the fishing boat's last known position. The conditions were worse than anything Cynthia had ever experienced. The waves were 30 feet high, maybe more. The wind was so strong it was hard to stand on deck. Rain was coming down in sheets so thick that visibility was almost zero. The rescue vessel was being thrown around like a toy, rising up on massive swells and then crashing down into deep troughs. But Cynthia and her crew were professionals. They knew what to do. They had done this before, though never in conditions quite this extreme. They fought their way through the storm, using instruments and expertise to navigate toward the fishing vessel. When they finally spotted the fishing boat, it was in terrible shape. It was half submerged, listing heavily to one side, being pushed toward the rocks by the waves and wind. The crew members were on deck in life jackets, clinging to whatever they could hold on to, clearly terrified. Cynthia had to make a decision. The safest option would be to wait for the storm to pass, but the fishing vessel would not last that long. It would hit the rocks within minutes, and everyone on board would die. The only option was to attempt a rescue now, in these impossible conditions. She gave the order. Her crew prepared to launch a rescue boat, a smaller vessel that could get closer to the fishing boat. According to standard procedure, Cynthia should have stayed on the main vessel to coordinate the operation. But she made a different choice. She decided to go with the rescue team. Michael Chen, Sarah Williams, David Martinez, and James Thompson were already in the rescue boat. Cynthia joined them. It was a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. The rescue boat launched into the chaos of the storm. The plan was to get close enough to the fishing vessel to evacuate the crew members one by one, then get back to the main vessel before the fishing boat hit the rocks. It was a dangerous plan, but it was the only chance. At first, things went according to plan. They managed to get close to the fishing vessel. They got 3 of the crew members into the rescue boat, then 4, then 5. But as they were pulling in the 6th person, a massive wave hit them. It was bigger than any of the others, a rogue wave that came out of nowhere. It struck the rescue boat with tremendous force, flipping it over and throwing everyone into the water. Cynthia remembered the shock of hitting the water, the cold that took her breath away, the disorientation of being underwater in complete darkness, not knowing which way was up. She fought her way to the surface, gasping for air, trying to see through the rain and spray. The rescue boat was gone, flipped somewhere. The fishing vessel was being pushed away by the current, and her crew members were scattered in the water, calling out to each other, trying to stay together. Training took over. Cynthia started organizing them, calling out instructions, trying to keep everyone calm and together. The main rescue vessel was close by, trying to reach them. They just had to stay afloat for a few more minutes. They had life jackets, they had training, they would make it. But then another wave came, and another. The conditions were too extreme. People were being separated, pushed apart by the current and the waves. Cynthia tried to keep track of everyone, tried to reach them, but it was impossible. The storm was too powerful. The main rescue vessel managed to pull several people out of the water. Cynthia was one of them. So were 3 of the fishing crew members. But when they did a count, 4 people were missing. Michael Chen, Sarah Williams, David Martinez, James Thompson, all 4 of them were gone. The Coast Guard launched a massive search operation. They searched through the rest of the night and into the next day, even after the storm passed. They searched for days. They used helicopters, boats, divers, every resource available, but they never found the 4 missing crew members. Eventually, they were declared lost at sea. The investigation that followed was thorough and difficult. Cynthia was questioned repeatedly about her decisions that night. Why had she gone in the rescue boat? Why had she not waited for better conditions? Had she properly assessed the risks? The investigation concluded that she had not violated any regulations or procedures. The storm had been unpredictable. The wave that flipped the boat had been a random act of nature. She was not formally blamed for what happened, but Cynthia blamed herself. She was the captain. She had made the decisions. She had ordered the rescue attempt in those conditions. She had chosen to go in the boat instead of staying on the main vessel where she belonged. And 4 people had died because of it. 4 people she cared about. 4 people with families who would never see them again. The guilt was crushing. She could barely function. She went through the motions of her job for a few more months, but her heart was not in it anymore. She could not sleep. She could not eat. Every time she looked at the ocean, she saw their faces. Every time she heard the wind, she heard their voices calling out in the dark water. She knew she could not continue. She was not fit to lead anymore. She was broken. So she resigned from the Coast Guard. She left behind the career she had built, the life she had known, the ocean she had loved. She needed to get away from all of it, to start over somewhere completely different. That was when she came to Stonewood. She had chosen it almost randomly, looking at a map and picking a place that was far inland, away from the coast, away from the ocean. She had driven here with a few boxes of belongings and her savings. She had bought the fishing hut from Walter, fixed it up, and started a new life. For 20 years, she had kept this past hidden. She had not told anyone in Stonewood about her time in the Coast Guard. She had not talked about the tragedy. She had buried it all deep inside and tried to move on. And mostly it had worked. She had built a good life here. She was happy here, or at least as happy as she could be with the weight of guilt she carried. But the past never really went away. It was always there, just under the surface, in her dreams, in her memories, in the skills and instincts she could not turn off no matter how hard she tried. She was still a Coast Guard captain in some deep part of herself, still trained to respond to emergencies, still wired to save lives. She just hoped she would never have to use those skills again. The weeks passed in their usual rhythm. June turned to July, and the summer heat settled over Stonewood. The fishing business was busy during these months. Tourists came to the lake to escape the heat of the city. Local families spent weekends by the water. Cynthia's hut did steady business, and she was grateful for the distraction of work. She fell into her regular routine. Early mornings on the lake, checking her lines and enjoying the quiet. Days in the shop, helping customers and maintaining equipment. Evenings at home, reading or working in her small garden or sitting on her porch and watching the neighborhood. It was a simple life, but it was hers, and she appreciated it. She spent time with her friends in town. On Wednesday evenings, she played cards with a group of women at the community center. Margaret was part of the group, along with Helen, a retired teacher, and Dorothy, who had owned the bakery for 40 years. They would play for a few hours, drinking tea and talking about their lives, catching up on town gossip. "Did you hear about the Johnsons?" Helen asked one evening as she dealt the cards. "Their daughter is getting married in September." "Oh, how lovely," Margaret said. "Young Emily? She's such a sweet girl." "She is," Helen agreed, "and the young man seems very nice. They met at college, I believe." The conversation flowed easily, covering everything from weddings to recipes to plans for the upcoming town festival. Cynthia enjoyed these evenings. The women were kind and welcoming, and they never pried too much into her past. They accepted her as she was, and that was a precious gift. On Saturday mornings, Cynthia volunteered at the town library. She helped organize books, assisted people with finding what they needed, and ran a reading program for children. She liked working with the kids. They were enthusiastic and curious, always asking questions and wanting to learn. She would read them stories about adventure and bravery, and they would sit in a circle around her, completely absorbed. One Saturday, a little girl named Emma asked her, "Miss Cynthia, were you ever brave? Did you ever have an adventure?" Cynthia paused, thinking about how to answer. "Everyone has adventures," she said carefully. "And everyone is brave in their own way. You're brave when you try something new or help someone who needs it." "But did you have a big adventure?" Emma persisted. "Like in the stories?" "I've had some interesting experiences," Cynthia said with a smile. "But the most important thing is not having adventures. It's being kind and helping others. That's real bravery." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer, and they moved on to the next story. But the question stayed with Cynthia. She had indeed had big adventures, adventures that most of these children could not imagine. She had faced danger and made life or death decisions and seen things that would give them nightmares. But those adventures had ended in tragedy, and she did not want to think about them. The town festival was approaching, and everyone was getting excited about it. The Stonewood Summer Festival was held every year in late July. It was a 3-day event with games, food booths, live music, and various contests. The whole town participated, and people from neighboring towns came to join in. It was the highlight of the summer. Cynthia had always participated in the festival. Usually she helped run the fishing booth, where kids could try to catch toy fish from a small pool and win prizes. It was a popular attraction, and she enjoyed teaching the children the basics of casting a line and reeling in their catch. This year, the festival committee asked her to do something additional. They wanted her to give a demonstration on proper fishing techniques for anyone who was interested. It would be a short presentation, maybe 30 minutes down by the lake. She could show people how to bait a hook, cast a line, and handle a fish safely. The committee thought it would be educational and entertaining. Cynthia agreed to do it. She was comfortable talking about fishing. It was her area of expertise, and she liked helping people learn. She started preparing her demonstration, gathering equipment, and planning what she would say. As the festival approached, the weather started to change. The temperature climbed higher than usual. The air felt heavy and still. Cynthia noticed clouds building in the west, dark and thick. Her old instincts told her that a storm was coming, probably a significant one. She mentioned it to a few people in town. "I think we might get some bad weather," she told Tom when he stopped by the hut one afternoon. Tom looked at the sky and shrugged. "The forecast says it'll be fine for the festival. Just some afternoon showers, maybe." "I hope so," Cynthia said. But she was not convinced. She had spent too many years watching weather patterns, learning to read the signs. Something bigger was building. She could feel it. Still, life went on. The festival preparations continued. Booths were set up on Main Street. The stage was built for the live music performances. Food vendors arrived with their trucks. The town was buzzing with excitement. Cynthia worked on her fishing demonstration. She set up a display of different types of equipment, from simple cane poles to advanced spinning rods. She prepared handouts with basic fishing tips. She practiced her presentation, making sure it would be clear and interesting for people of all ages. The night before the festival, she had trouble sleeping again, not because of nightmares this time, but because of the weather. The wind was picking up. She could hear it rattling her windows, whistling through the trees. The temperature had dropped suddenly, and there was electricity in the air that made her nervous. She got up and looked out the window. The sky was dark, even though it was not quite midnight. She could not see any stars. The clouds were thick and moving fast. This was not just a summer shower. This was something more serious. She turned on her weather radio, an old habit from her Coast Guard days. The forecast had been updated. A severe storm system was moving into the area. There would be high winds, heavy rain, possible flash flooding. A storm warning was in effect for the entire county. Cynthia frowned. This could be dangerous, especially on the lake. Miller's Lake was usually calm and safe, but in high winds, it could become treacherous. The water could turn rough. Boats could be caught off guard. People who were not experienced with bad weather could get into trouble. She hoped everyone would have the good sense to stay off the water during the storm. But she knew from experience that people often underestimated the danger. They thought they could outrun a storm, or that their boat was strong enough to handle it. They did not understand how quickly conditions could deteriorate. She went back to bed, but did not sleep much. She lay awake, listening to the wind, feeling the change in the air pressure, thinking about the lake and the people who might be on it. The morning of the festival dawned gray and cool. The sky was overcast, and the wind was still blowing strongly. But it was not raining yet, and the storm warnings had been downgraded to storm watches. The festival committee decided to go ahead with the event. They would monitor the weather and cancel if conditions got worse. Cynthia went to the festival grounds early to set up her fishing demonstration area. It was located right next to the lake, on a grassy area where people could gather. She arranged her equipment on tables and set up a small portable dock where she could demonstrate casting techniques. Despite the gray weather, people started arriving. The festival had a carnival atmosphere. Music played from speakers. Children ran around with balloons and cotton candy. Food vendors were busy cooking and serving. The smell of grilled meat and fried dough filled the air. Cynthia's demonstration was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Until then, she helped out at the children's fishing booth, showing kids how to cast their little rods into the pool and catch toy fish. The children were delighted, and their parents were grateful for the activity. Around noon, the rain started. At first, it was just a light drizzle, and most people ignored it. But within an hour, it was raining harder. The wind picked up, too. People started taking shelter under tents and awnings. Some families decided to leave early, not wanting to get soaked. Cynthia looked at the sky with concern. This was the beginning of the storm she had sensed. It was going to get worse. She thought the festival should probably be canceled, but that was not her decision to make. The festival committee held a quick meeting. They decided to continue for now, but to cancel any outdoor activities if the weather got worse. Cynthia's fishing demonstration was still scheduled to go ahead at 2 o'clock, as long as the rain did not become too heavy. At 1:30, Cynthia went to her demonstration area to prepare. The rain had eased a bit, though the wind was still strong. A small crowd was gathering, people interested in learning about fishing. Among them were several teenagers, both boys and girls, who were part of the Stonewood Youth Boating Club. The boating club was a local organization that taught young people how to sail and operate boats safely. They used Miller's Lake for their activities, and they were a familiar sight during the summer months. Their boats were small sailboats and motorboats, nothing fancy, but good learning vessels. Cynthia recognized some of the teenagers. There was Josh Miller, the mayor's son, a confident 16-year-old who thought he was an expert sailor. His girlfriend Katie was with him, along with 4 of their friends, Mark, Lisa, Ryan, and Jennifer. They were good kids, generally responsible, but like all teenagers, they sometimes thought they were more capable than they actually were. "Miss Cynthia," Josh called out, "are you still doing your demonstration? We wanted to learn some fishing tricks." "I am," Cynthia said, "but you should all stay close to shore today. The weather is getting worse." "We know," Josh said. "We're not going out on the lake today, too windy." Cynthia nodded, relieved. At least these kids had good sense. She started her demonstration at 2 o'clock. Despite the gray weather, she had about 30 people watching, including the teenagers. She showed them different types of fishing equipment and explained how to choose the right gear. She demonstrated how to bait a hook properly, how to cast a line with good technique, and how to reel in a fish without losing it. People asked questions, and she answered them patiently. She showed them how to read the water to find where fish were likely to be. She talked about safety on the water, about always wearing a life jacket and checking weather conditions before going out. "The lake can be very safe," she said, "but you have to respect it. Water is powerful and weather can change quickly. Always be prepared." As she was finishing up her demonstration, the rain started again, heavier this time. The wind gusted strongly, making the trees bend. People started packing up and heading for shelter. Cynthia quickly packed away her equipment. The storm was definitely getting worse. She hoped everyone would have the sense to go home and stay inside. She was carrying her last box of equipment back to her truck when she heard a commotion. People were shouting, pointing toward the lake. She turned to look and felt her heart drop. Out on the water, about a quarter mile from shore, was a boat. It was one of the Youth Boating Club's boats, a small motorboat. And it was clearly in trouble. The wind had picked up dramatically in the last few minutes, and the lake, which had been relatively calm, was now choppy with white-capped waves. The boat was being tossed around, taking on water. Cynthia ran toward the shore to get a better look. Other people were running too, all trying to see what was happening. She pulled out the small binoculars she always kept in her pocket, another habit from her old life, and focused on the boat. Her stomach clenched. There were 6 people on the boat. She recognized them even from this distance: Josh, Katie, Mark, Lisa, Ryan, and Jennifer, the teenagers from the boating club. They must have decided to take a quick ride after all, thinking they could beat the storm. Now they were caught in increasingly dangerous conditions. As Cynthia watched, a large wave hit the boat. It tilted sharply, and she saw water pouring over the side. The teenagers were clearly panicking. They were trying to bail out water, trying to steer back toward shore, but the wind and waves were too strong. They were losing control. "Someone call 911!" a man next to Cynthia shouted. "Those kids are in trouble!" Several people pulled out phones and started making calls. Cynthia stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. She knew what was about to happen. She had seen it before. The boat was taking on too much water. The teenagers did not have the skills to handle these conditions. They were going to capsize. The emergency services were based in the town of Millbrook, about 15 miles away. They would come as fast as they could, but it would take time. Probably at least 15 minutes, maybe 20. Those kids did not have that much time. Cynthia looked around desperately. She saw her own small motorboat tied to the dock near her fishing hut, less than 100 yards away. She looked back at the teenagers on the lake. They were in serious danger. If the boat capsized, they would be in the water in rough conditions. They had life jackets on. She could see the orange color. But life jackets would not save them if they got hypothermia from the cold water, or if they got hit by their own boat as it went down, or if they panicked and could not stay together. For 20 years, Cynthia had avoided situations like this. She had deliberately chosen a quiet life away from emergencies and danger. She had tried to leave behind the skills and training that had once defined her. She had wanted to forget the terrible night when she had made decisions that cost 4 lives. But now, standing on the shore of Miller's Lake, watching 6 teenagers in mortal danger, she realized she could not run away anymore. If she did nothing, if she waited for the emergency services to arrive, those kids might die. And their deaths would be one more weight on her conscience, one more tragedy she could have prevented. She made her decision in an instant. It was the same decision she had made countless times during her Coast Guard career. It was the decision she had been trained to make. She could not stand by and watch people die, not when she had the skills and equipment to help. "I'm going out there," she said to the people around her. They looked at her in surprise. "You?" someone said. "Cynthia, you can't go out in this storm. It's too dangerous." "I have to," Cynthia said simply. "I know what I'm doing." Without waiting for a response, she started running toward her fishing hut. Her mind was already in emergency mode, calculating distances and timing, assessing the conditions, planning the rescue. It was as if the last 20 years had disappeared and she was back in the Coast Guard, responding to a distress call. She reached her boat in less than a minute. She quickly checked it over, making sure everything was functioning. Engine, fuel, life jackets, rope. Everything she needed was there. She had maintained this boat meticulously, always keeping it ready, even though she had told herself she would never need it for something like this. She jumped into the boat and started the engine. It roared to life immediately. She untied the rope and pushed away from the dock. Behind her, she could hear people shouting, telling her to stop, to wait for help. But she did not look back. She focused on the lake, on the teenagers, on what she needed to do. As soon as she cleared the dock, she pushed the throttle forward. The boat leaped forward, cutting through the choppy water. The wind hit her hard, and rain pelted her face. The lake was rougher than it had looked from shore. Waves were 2 or 3 feet high, and the wind was gusting unpredictably. But Cynthia had navigated much worse. She adjusted her course, reading the water, anticipating the waves. She kept her eyes on the teenager's boat. It was listing badly now, clearly taking on more water. She could see the kids waving their arms, trying to signal for help. They had seen her coming. She was their only hope. She covered the distance in about 3 minutes, which felt like an eternity. As she got closer, she assessed the situation more carefully. The boat had not capsized yet, but it was close. Water was up to the teenagers' knees. The engine had died. They were helpless. "Hold on!" Cynthia shouted as she approached. "I'm going to get you out of there." "Hurry!" Josh shouted back. His voice was high with panic. "We're sinking!"
Cynthia maneuvered her boat alongside theirs, a tricky maneuver in these conditions. One wrong move and the boats could collide and both could be damaged. But her hands were steady, her movements precise. She had done this before. She knew exactly what to do. "Listen to me," she shouted to the teenagers. "You need to move one at a time. Do not panic. Do exactly what I say, understand?" They nodded, their faces pale with fear. "You first," Cynthia said, pointing to Katie, who was closest. "Step over carefully. Hands on the side of the boat. I've got you." Katie moved forward, reaching toward Cynthia's boat. Her hands were shaking. Cynthia grabbed her wrist firmly and guided her over. Katie climbed into the boat and immediately moved to the back, out of the way. "Next," Cynthia said, looking at Jennifer. One by one, she brought them over. Jennifer, then Lisa, then Mark, then Ryan. Each transfer was carefully controlled. Cynthia talked them through each movement, keeping them calm, making sure no one fell into the water. Finally, only Josh was left on the sinking boat. He was standing in water up to his waist now. The boat was going down fast. "Come on, Josh," Cynthia said. "Quickly now." Josh started to move, but at that moment, a large wave hit both boats. Josh lost his balance and fell sideways. He grabbed for the side of the boat, but missed. He went into the water with a splash. Cynthia did not hesitate. She grabbed the rescue rope coiled at her feet, another piece of equipment she had always kept ready, and threw it toward Josh. He was thrashing in the water, clearly scared, not thinking clearly. "Josh, grab the rope," Cynthia shouted. Josh reached for it and caught it. Cynthia pulled, hauling him through the water toward her boat. When he was close enough, she leaned over and grabbed him under his arms, pulling with all her strength. He was heavy, and the boat was rocking in the waves, but she managed to haul him up and over the side. He collapsed onto the deck, coughing and shivering. The teenager's boat chose that moment to capsize completely. It flipped over with a splash and started to sink. Within seconds, it disappeared beneath the surface. "Everyone okay?" Cynthia asked, quickly checking each teenager. They were all wet, cold, and scared, but alive. "We're okay," Katie said, her teeth chattering. Thank you so much." "Hold on tight," Cynthia said. "We're going back to shore." She turned the boat around and started heading back. The wind was even stronger now, and the rain was coming down in sheets. Visibility was poor, but Cynthia navigated by instinct and experience, keeping the boat steady, fighting the waves. The teenagers huddled together in the back of the boat, holding on to each other. They were silent now, the reality of what had almost happened sinking in. They had come very close to dying. If Cynthia had not gone out when she did, if she had waited even another minute or two, the boat would have sunk and they all would have been in the water. In these conditions, even with life jackets, their survival would have been uncertain. Cynthia kept her focus on getting them back to shore. Her hands gripped the wheel firmly. Her eyes scanned the water ahead, watching for obstacles, judging the waves. She felt completely calm, completely in control. This was what she had trained for. This was what she knew how to do. When they finally reached the dock, a crowd of people was waiting. Someone had alerted the whole festival, and everyone had come to watch. They saw Cynthia's boat approaching with all 6 teenagers on board, and a cheer went up. People were crying with relief. Parents pushed forward, desperate to reach their children. Cynthia brought the boat alongside the dock expertly. People helped tie it up and then reached down to help the teenagers out. They were wrapped in blankets immediately. Parents hugged them, crying. The mayor, Josh's father, was there, his face pale with shock and gratitude. "You saved my son," he said to Cynthia, his voice breaking. "You saved all of them." Cynthia climbed out of the boat, suddenly feeling very tired. Now that the emergency was over, the adrenaline was leaving her system. She stood on the dock, water dripping from her clothes, and looked at the teenagers being reunited with their families. "Is everyone all right?" she asked. "They're fine," someone said. "Cold and scared, but fine. Thanks to you." The paramedics arrived then, the emergency services that had been called earlier. They checked over each teenager, making sure there were no injuries. They wrapped them in more blankets and took their vital signs. Everyone was pronounced healthy, just suffering from cold and shock. As the paramedics worked, people started pressing around Cynthia, asking questions. How did you do that? That was incredible. Where did you learn to handle a boat like that? Cynthia did not want to answer. She just wanted to go home, to be alone, to process what had just happened. But people kept asking, and finally, Tom Harrison spoke up. That was professional, he said slowly. The way you handled that boat, the way you managed the rescue, that was not just good boating. That was expert level. That was like Coast Guard level. People went quiet. Everyone was looking at Cynthia now. She met Tom's eyes and saw the question there. She took a deep breath. She was too tired to keep the secret anymore. And maybe it was time. Maybe after 20 years of hiding, it was time to tell the truth. I was in the Coast Guard, she said quietly. For more than 20 years, I was a captain. I led search and rescue operations. There was a collective gasp. People looked at each other in shock. You were Coast Guard? Margaret said. All this time, and we never knew? I did not want people to know, Cynthia said. I left that life behind when I came here. I just wanted to be normal, to live quietly. Why did you leave? Someone asked. Cynthia hesitated. She did not want to talk about the tragedy, about the 4 people she had lost. But she had started this conversation. She might as well finish it. There was an accident, she said. A rescue that went wrong. People died. People I was responsible for. I could not continue after that. I needed to get away. The crowd was silent. Everyone could see the pain in her face, hear it in her voice. They understood that whatever had happened, it still hurt her deeply. But you came back, the mayor said softly. When my son needed help, you came back. You used those skills to save him and his friends. Cynthia nodded. I could not stand by and watch them die. I had to do something. The mayor stepped forward and took her hand. Thank you, he said. I don't know what I would have done if I lost Josh. You gave him back to me. You gave all these kids back to their families. Whatever happened in your past, whatever mistakes you think you made up for it today. You're a hero. Cynthia felt tears stinging her eyes. She had not expected this. She had expected questions and judgment, not gratitude and acceptance. Other people came forward then, shaking her hand, hugging her, thanking her. The parents of the teenagers were especially emotional. They could not stop thanking her. They told her she would always be welcome in their homes, that they would never forget what she had done. The storm was getting worse, and people started to disperse, heading home or to shelter. The festival was officially canceled. But before everyone left, the mayor made an announcement. Let's hear it for Cynthia Rhodes, he shouted, the hero of Stonewood. The crowd cheered. It was a long, loud cheer that echoed across the lake. Cynthia stood there, embarrassed and moved, not knowing what to say. Finally, people left, and she was alone on the dock with just a few stragglers. She looked out at the lake, which was now very rough with white caps everywhere. The teenager's boat was gone, sunk to the bottom. If she had not acted when she did, those 6 young people might have gone down with it. She felt something shift inside her. For 20 years, she had carried the guilt of losing her crew members. She had believed that she was a failure, that her decisions had caused their deaths. But today, she had saved lives. She had used the exact same skills, the exact same training, and it had worked. Maybe she was not a failure after all. Maybe the tragedy 20 years ago was not her fault. Maybe she had just been unlucky, caught in impossible conditions, doing her best in a situation that was beyond anyone's control. She could not change the past. Michael, Sarah, David, and James were still gone, but she had honored their memory today. She had done what they would have wanted her to do, She had saved lives. Cynthia walked slowly back to her truck, her wet clothes clinging to her. She was cold and tired, but she also felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt peace. Not complete peace. She knew the nightmares would not disappear overnight, but a beginning of peace. A sense that maybe, just maybe, she could forgive herself. The storm passed through Stonewood that night, bringing heavy rain and wind but no major damage. By morning, the sky was clear again, and the lake was calm. It was as if the violence of the previous day had never happened, but for the people of Stonewood, everything had changed. The story of Cynthia's rescue spread quickly. By the next day, everyone in town knew about it. People talked about it in the grocery store, at the coffee shop, at church. Cynthia Rhodes, the quiet fishing hut owner, was actually a former Coast Guard captain who had saved 6 teenagers from drowning. Cynthia woke up that morning feeling strange. She had slept deeply, without nightmares for the first time in weeks. Her body was sore from the physical exertion of the rescue, but her mind felt clear. She got up, made coffee, and sat on her porch watching the sunrise. She knew her life in Stonewood would be different now. People knew her secret. They would ask questions. They would see her differently. Part of her was afraid of that. She had valued her anonymity, her ability to just be a normal person living a normal life. But another part of her felt relieved. She had been carrying the weight of her secret for so long. Maybe it would be easier now that people knew. Maybe she could stop pretending to be someone she was not. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Tom Harrison standing there with a big smile on his face. "Morning, Cynthia," he said. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Cynthia said. "Come in." Tom came inside, looking around her small cottage with interest. He had never been here before. "I just wanted to check on you," he said. "Make sure you're okay after yesterday." "I'm fine," Cynthia said. "A bit sore, but fine." "That was amazing what you did," Tom said. "Everyone's talking about it. You're a celebrity now." Cynthia made a face. "I don't want to be a celebrity. I just did what anyone would do." "No," Tom said seriously. "Not anyone could have done what you did. That took real skill and courage. You should be proud." Cynthia made tea for both of them, and they sat at her kitchen table. Tom had a lot of questions, and Cynthia found herself answering them. She told him about her time in the Coast Guard, about the missions she had led, about the lives she had saved. She did not go into detail about the tragedy that had ended her career. That was still too painful, but she gave him a general sense of what had happened. "So you've been here for 20 years, Tom said, "carrying that weight all by yourself. That must have been hard." "It was," Cynthia admitted. "But I needed the peace and quiet. I needed to get away from everything that reminded me of that night." "And now?" Tom asked. "Now that people know?" Cynthia thought about it. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I guess we'll see. I hope people don't treat me too differently." But of course, people did treat her differently. Over the next few days, Cynthia found that her quiet anonymity was gone. People stopped her on the street to thank her and congratulate her. The local newspaper ran a big story about the rescue, with her photo on the front page. The headline read, "Local Hero Reveals Coast Guard Past." The story included interviews with the 6 teenagers she had saved. Josh Miller was quoted as saying, "We thought we were going to die. The boat was sinking, and we were so scared. Then Miss Cynthia came out in the storm like it was nothing. She saved us. She's my hero." The other teenagers said similar things. Their parents also gave statements, talking about how grateful they were and how Cynthia deserved recognition for her bravery. Cynthia found it all very overwhelming. She was not used to this kind of attention. She had spent 2 decades trying to be invisible, and now everyone wanted to talk to her. Some people from her past also reached out. a few of her old Coast Guard colleagues saw the news story online and contacted her. They sent messages saying they were proud of her, that they had always known she was an exceptional officer, that they were sorry about what had happened all those years ago. One message was from Admiral Patricia Henderson, who had been Cynthia's commanding officer during her final years in the Coast Guard. The Admiral had retired several years ago, but she still kept in touch with former crew members. "Cynthia," the message read, "I saw the news about your rescue. I always knew you were one of the best. What happened 20 years ago was a tragedy, but it was not your fault. You did everything right. The storm was just too powerful. I hope you know that. I hope you found peace. You deserve it. And congratulations on saving those young people. You're still a hero." Cynthia read the message several times. It helped to hear those words from someone she respected. Maybe the Admiral was right. Maybe it had not been her fault. Maybe she had done everything she could. A few days after the rescue, the mayor invited Cynthia to a special town council meeting. When she arrived at the community center, she found it packed with people. The 6 teenagers she had saved were there with their families. Many of her friends and regular customers were there. Even the local media had shown up. The mayor stood at the front of the room and called for quiet. "We're gathered here tonight," he said, "to honor someone very special. Cynthia Rhodes has been a valued member of our community for 20 years. But recently, we learned that she's more than just our friendly fishing hut owner. She's a hero who has dedicated her life to saving others." The mayor went on to describe the rescue in detail. Then he presented Cynthia with a plaque that read, "To Cynthia Rhodes, for extraordinary bravery and selfless service to the community of Stonewood. You are our hero." The crowd stood and applauded. Cynthia felt her face turning red, but she accepted the plaque graciously. "Thank you," she said when the applause died down. "I appreciate this recognition, but I want to say something. What I did last week was not about being a hero. It was about using skills I learned a long time ago to help people who needed it. That's what we should all do. Help each other when we can. That's what makes a community strong." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I came to Stonewood 20 years ago because I needed to escape my past. I had experienced a terrible tragedy, and I could not face it. I ran away and hid here, thinking I could forget. But you can't really forget your past. It's always with you. What you can do is learn from it and try to do better." She looked at the teenagers. "When I saw those kids in danger, I had a choice. I could stay on shore and let someone else handle it, or I could use my training to help. I chose to help, and I'm glad I did. Not because it makes me a hero, but because it's what I was trained to do. It's what I should have been doing all along, using my skills to serve others." The crowd applauded again. After the meeting, many people came up to talk to Cynthia. The teenagers thanked her again. Their parents hugged her and cried. The mayor's wife invited her to dinner. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. Over the following weeks, life in Stonewood slowly returned to normal. People still thanked Cynthia when they saw her, but the intense attention faded. She went back to running her fishing hut, helping customers, and maintaining her equipment. But there were some changes. For one thing, people seemed more interested in her advice now. When she suggested safety measures or warned about weather conditions, people listened more carefully. Her expertise was now recognized and valued. She also started teaching a free boating safety class on weekends. After what had happened with the teenagers, she realized that many people in Stonewood did not really understand how to handle boats safely, especially in bad conditions. She wanted to change that. She wanted to make sure no one else got into the kind of danger those 6 young people had faced. The classes were popular. Adults and teenagers came to learn about life jackets, emergency procedures, reading weather conditions, and safe boating practices. Cynthia was a good teacher. She was patient and thorough, and she made the material interesting by sharing stories from her Coast Guard days. The teenagers she had saved became regular visitors to her fishing hut. Josh, Katie, Mark, Lisa, Ryan, and Jennifer stopped by often to chat and to help out with small tasks. They had formed a special bond with Cynthia. She had saved their lives, and they wanted to show their gratitude by being her friends. "You know," Josh said one day while helping her organize tackle boxes, "before that day on the lake, I thought I was pretty smart. I thought I knew everything about boating. But I was wrong. I almost got my friends killed because I thought I knew better than the weather warnings." "We all make mistakes," Cynthia said. "The important thing is learning from them." "I learned," Josh said seriously. "I'll never take that kind of risk again. And if I ever have kids someday, I'm going to teach them to respect the water and listen to people who know what they're talking about." Cynthia smiled. "That's good. That's very good." One Saturday afternoon, about a month after the rescue, Cynthia was sitting on her dock enjoying the sunshine when she saw a car pull up near her hut. A woman got out, someone Cynthia did not recognize. She was about 50 years old, with dark hair and a kind face. She walked toward the dock, looking around. "Excuse me," the woman called. "Are you Cynthia Rhodes?" "I am," Cynthia said, standing up. "Can I help you?" The woman came closer, and Cynthia could see that she had tears in her eyes. "My name is Linda Chen," she said. "I'm Michael Chen's sister." Cynthia felt her heart stop. Michael Chen, her second in command, who had died in the storm 20 years ago. She had not heard that name spoken aloud in 2 decades. "I saw the news story about your rescue," Linda continued. "I recognized your name. I wanted to come and meet you." Cynthia did not know what to say. She felt frozen, unable to move or speak. "I know this is unexpected," Linda said gently. "And I know what happened that night was very difficult for you. My brother's death was difficult for all of us, but I wanted you to know something. I never blamed you. None of our family ever blamed you." Cynthia found her voice. "I was the captain," she whispered. "I made the decisions. It was my fault." "No," Linda said firmly. "It was not your fault. It was a terrible storm and a tragic accident. You did everything you could. Michael knew the risks of his job. He loved what he did. He believed in the mission. He would not want you to carry guilt for something that was beyond your control." Tears were running down Cynthia's face now. She had imagined this conversation many times over the years, but she had never expected it to really happen. "After Michael died," Linda continued, "we learned about all the missions you led, all the lives you saved. Michael's commanding officers told us what an exceptional leader you were. They said you were one of the best they had ever worked with. Michael believed in you. He trusted you completely." "I failed him," Cynthia said, her voice breaking. "You did not fail him," Linda said. "You led him and his team on countless successful missions. You saved so many lives together. The night he died was not your fault. It was just bad luck. A terrible, tragic coincidence of events that no one could have prevented." Linda reached out and took Cynthia's hand. "I came here to tell you something my brother would want you to know. He would be proud of you. He would be proud that you saved those teenagers. He would want you to forgive yourself and move on. He would want you to be happy." Cynthia could not speak. She just stood there crying, holding Linda's hand. It was as if a dam had broken inside her, releasing 20 years of pent-up grief and guilt. They sat on the dock for a long time, talking about Michael, about the other crew members who had died, about the Coast Guard, about life and loss and healing. Linda shared stories about her brother, about his childhood, about his dreams and his personality. Cynthia shared stories about their missions together, about Michael's bravery and skill, about what a good friend he had been. "Thank you for coming," Cynthia finally said. I never thought I would have the chance to talk about this with someone who understood." "I'm glad I came," Linda said. "I've wanted to meet you for years, but I did not know where you were. When I saw the news story, I knew I had to come." Before Linda left, she hugged Cynthia. "Be happy," she said. "That's what Michael would want. Live your life. Don't hide anymore."
After Linda drove away, Cynthia sat on the dock for a long time, watching the water. Something had changed inside her. The guilt was still there. She knew it would never completely go away. But it felt lighter now, more manageable. Linda's words had given her permission to forgive herself, to accept that sometimes bad things happen despite our best efforts. That night, for the first time in 20 years, Cynthia called one of her old Coast Guard colleagues. It was a woman named Maria Santos, who had been a fellow officer and a close friend. They had not spoken since Cynthia left the service. "Cynthia?" Maria said when she answered, sounding shocked. "Is that really you?" "It's me," Cynthia said. "I know it's been a long time. I'm sorry I disappeared." "Don't apologize," Maria said. "I understood. We all understood. What happened was traumatic. You needed space." They talked for over an hour, catching up on 20 years of life. Maria had stayed in the Coast Guard and had recently retired as a commander. She was proud of her career and had many stories to share. She asked about Cynthia's life in Stonewood, and Cynthia found herself talking honestly about the last 2 decades, about her fishing hut, about her quiet life, and about the recent rescue. "You saved 6 people," Maria said. "That's incredible, and it shows that you still have it. You're still that same skilled, brave person you always were." "I don't feel brave," Cynthia admitted. "I feel like I've been running away for 20 years. "Maybe," Maria said. "But running away is not always wrong. Sometimes we need to step back and heal, and then, when we're ready, we step forward again." That's what you did. You stepped forward when those kids needed you. After the call, Cynthia felt more connected to her past than she had in years. She realized that she did not have to choose between her old life and her new life. She could be both the Coast Guard captain and the fishing hut owner. She could acknowledge her past while living in the present. As summer turned to fall, Cynthia settled into her new reality. She was no longer just the quiet fishing woman. She was Cynthia Rhodes, former Coast Guard captain, local hero, and valued community member. People knew her story now, and that was okay. She was learning to accept it. She continued teaching her boating safety classes, which had become very popular. She expanded them to include more advanced topics like emergency response procedures and first aid on the water. Local parents were grateful for the classes, knowing their children were learning important life skills. The Youth Boating Club asked her to become an advisor. She accepted working with the teenagers to improve their skills and emphasizing safety above all else. Josh and his friends were her most dedicated students, determined to never make the same mistakes again. Cynthia also volunteered with the local emergency services. She helped them develop better water rescue protocols and trained some of the firefighters and EMTs in basic water rescue techniques. The county emergency coordinator was thrilled to have someone with her expertise and experience. Her fishing hut business continued to do well. If anything, it was busier than before. People came not just to rent equipment, but to meet the local hero and hear stories about the Coast Guard. Cynthia found that she enjoyed sharing those stories now. It felt good to talk about the positive aspects of her career, the successful missions, the lives saved, instead of just focusing on the tragedy. She also reconnected with more of her old Coast Guard colleagues. She joined an online group for retired Coast Guard personnel and started attending regional meetups. It felt good to be part of that community again, to share experiences with people who understood what it was like to work in search and rescue. One of her old friends, a retired chief petty officer named Robert Johnson, lived in a city about 2 hours away. He invited Cynthia to visit, and she accepted. It was her first real trip away from Stonewood in years. Robert showed her around his city and introduced her to other retired Coast Guard members. They went to dinner at a restaurant near the waterfront, and Cynthia found herself surrounded by people who spoke her language, who understood her experiences. It was wonderful. "You seem different," Robert said at one point during dinner. "More at peace than I remember." "I am," Cynthia said. "I think I've finally started to forgive myself for what happened." "Good," Robert said, "because the rest of us never blamed you. We always knew you were one of the best." That fall, Cynthia did something she had not done in 20 years. She went to the ocean. She drove to the coast, to a quiet beach far from where she used to work. She walked on the sand, felt the salt spray on her face, and listened to the waves. She had been afraid that the ocean would trigger all her old fears and memories. And it did bring back memories, but not just bad ones. She remembered the beauty of sunrise over the water, the satisfaction of a successful rescue, the camaraderie of her crew. She remembered why she had loved this job in the first place. She stood at the edge of the water, letting the waves wash over her feet, and she said a quiet goodbye to Michael, Sarah, David, and James. She told them she was sorry. She told them she would never forget them. And she told them she was going to be okay now. When she drove back to Stonewood that evening, she felt lighter than she had in years. The guilt was still there. It would probably always be there. But it was no longer crushing her. She could live with it now. She could move forward. Back in Stonewood, life continued its gentle rhythm. The fall colors appeared on the trees around Miller's Lake, turning the landscape into a painting of reds and golds. The weather cooled, and the summer tourists disappeared. The town settled into its quieter winter routine. Cynthia continued her work at the fishing hut, though business slowed down in the colder months. She used the extra time to maintain equipment, plan improvements for next season, and work on a project she had been thinking about for a while. She decided to write a manual on water safety and emergency response for small lakes. She wanted to share her knowledge in a way that could help other communities avoid the kind of near tragedy that had happened in Stonewood. She worked on it during the long winter evenings, drawing on her decades of experience. The teenagers she had saved came by often, even in winter. They had become like surrogate grandchildren to her. She taught them how to tie knots, how to repair equipment, how to read maps and weather patterns. They helped her with chores around the hut and kept her company. "You know," Katie said one cold December afternoon while they were winterizing boats, "you changed our lives, not just because you saved us, but because you taught us to take responsibility seriously." "That's good," Cynthia said. "That's what I hoped for." "We've all decided to go into public service careers," Josh added. "Mark wants to be a firefighter. Lisa wants to be a paramedic. Ryan is thinking about the Coast Guard. And Katie and I want to become emergency management coordinators." Cynthia felt a warmth in her chest. "That's wonderful. The world needs people like you." "We want to be like you," Jennifer said. "Someone who steps up when people need help." As Christmas approached, Cynthia received an unexpected invitation. The parents of the 6 teenagers were hosting a special dinner to thank her, and they wanted her to come. She was hesitant at first. She did not like being the center of attention. But they insisted. The dinner was held at the mayor's house. All 6 families were there, along with a few other community leaders. It was a warm, joyful gathering. The parents had prepared a feast, and there were decorations and music and laughter. During dinner, the mayor stood up to make a toast. "This year has been extraordinary for Stonewood," he said. "We experienced a near tragedy that could have devastated our community. But instead, we discovered a hero among us. Cynthia Rhodes stepped up in our darkest moment and saved 6 of our children. She did it without hesitation. without thought for her own safety. And in doing so, she reminded us all what it means to be part of a community, to care for each other, to help each other, to be there when we're needed. Everyone raised their glasses, and Cynthia felt tears in her eyes. These people had accepted her completely, knowing her past, understanding her pain, and valuing her for who she was. "I want to say something too," Josh said, standing up. He looked nervous, but determined. "Miss Cynthia, you saved my life and my friends' lives. But you also taught us something important. You taught us that making mistakes is not the end. You made a mistake 20 years ago, or at least you think you did, and you ran away from it. But then you came back. When we needed you, you faced your fears and did what was right. That's real courage. That's what I want to remember." Cynthia could not speak. She was too moved by his words. She just nodded, acknowledging his message. After dinner, as people were saying goodbye, the mayor's wife pressed an envelope into Cynthia's hand. "This is from all of us," she said. "Open it when you get home." When Cynthia got home that night and opened the envelope, she found a card signed by everyone at the dinner. Inside were heartfelt messages of thanks and appreciation. There was also a check for $10,000. "We know you don't need the money," the card said, "but we wanted to do something to show our gratitude. Maybe you could use this to expand your safety training program or to help other communities develop water rescue capabilities, or use it however you want. You deserve it." Cynthia sat in her living room, holding the card and the check, and cried. They were tears of gratitude and relief and happiness. She had spent 20 years thinking she was a failure, believing she did not deserve happiness or peace. But these people had shown her otherwise. They had given her a gift far more valuable than money. They had given her acceptance and community and love. She decided to use the money to establish a water safety education fund. It would provide free training and equipment to people who could not afford it. It would help ensure that what happened to those 6 teenagers would never happen again, not just in Stonewood, but in other communities too. Winter in Stonewood was beautiful. Snow covered the ground and the lake froze over. People went ice fishing, and children skated on the safe parts of the ice. Cynthia kept her hut open even in winter, catering to the ice fishermen who came to the lake. She also kept teaching her safety classes, adapting them for winter conditions. She taught people about ice thickness and safety, about hypothermia and cold water survival, about emergency procedures for ice rescue. Her classes were always full. One February morning, Cynthia was at her hut organizing equipment when her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered it. "Hello, is this Cynthia Rhodes?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is she," Cynthia replied. "My name is Karen Williams. I'm a producer for a documentary series about everyday heroes. We came across the story of your rescue in Stonewood, and we're very interested in featuring you in an upcoming episode. Would you be willing to participate?" Cynthia's first instinct was to say no. She did not want that kind of attention. But then she thought about it more carefully. Maybe this could be an opportunity to spread the message about water safety and emergency preparedness. Maybe her story could help other people. "What would it involve?" she asked. Karen explained that they would send a small film crew to Stonewood for a few days. They would interview Cynthia, talk to the people she saved, and film some footage of her working at the hut and teaching her safety classes. The documentary would air on a national channel and would highlight her Coast Guard career and her recent rescue. "I would want to focus on safety education," Cynthia said. "Not just on me as a hero, but on the importance of being prepared and knowing how to respond in emergencies." "Absolutely," Karen said. "That's exactly the kind of message we want to convey." Cynthia agreed to participate. The film crew came to Stonewood in March, as winter was turning to spring. They spent 3 days filming. They interviewed Cynthia at her hut, on the lake, and in her home. They interviewed the 6 teenagers she had saved, their parents, and various community members. They filmed her teaching one of her safety classes. Cynthia was nervous at first, uncomfortable with the cameras and the attention, but the crew was professional and kind, and they made her feel at ease. She found herself opening up about her past, talking about her Coast Guard career in ways she had never done before. She even talked about the tragedy that had driven her away from the service. She explained what had happened that night, how she had lost her crew members, how the guilt had overwhelmed her. She talked about coming to Stonewood, about hiding from her past, about the nightmares that still haunted her sometimes. "Do you still feel guilty?" the interviewer asked gently. "Yes," Cynthia admitted. "I think I always will, at least a little. But I've learned to live with it. I've learned that making a decision that has a bad outcome doesn't make you a bad person or a failure. Sometimes things just go wrong, no matter how well prepared you are. What matters is learning from it and trying to do better next time." "And you did do better," the interviewer said. "You saved those 6 teenagers." "I did," Cynthia said, "and I'm grateful I had the chance. It doesn't erase what happened 20 years ago, but it helps. It helps me believe that my skills and experience have value, that I can still make a positive difference." The documentary aired 2 months later, in May. Cynthia watched it at home with some friends from Stonewood. She was surprised by how good it was. The producers had done an excellent job of telling her story while also emphasizing the broader themes of safety, preparedness, and community. The documentary ended with footage of Cynthia on the lake at sunrise, exactly the way she started most days. Her voiceover said, "I spent 20 years running from my past. But I've learned that you can't outrun who you are. My past shaped me, taught me, and gave me skills that saved lives. Now I'm trying to use those skills to help others, to teach people how to stay safe, and to build a community where everyone looks out for each other. That's my mission now. Not Coast Guard missions, but community missions. And it feels right." The response to the documentary was overwhelming. Cynthia received hundreds of messages from people all over the country. Some were from other Coast Guard veterans, thanking her for representing the service with dignity and honesty. Some were from people who had experienced similar tragedies and felt less alone after hearing her story. Some were from communities asking for her help in developing their own water safety programs. Cynthia was humbled by the response. She tried to answer as many messages as she could, offering encouragement and advice. She also started developing materials that could be shared with other communities, training manuals, safety checklists, emergency response protocols. She also received a message from Admiral Henderson, her old commanding officer. The Admiral had seen the documentary and wanted to let Cynthia know how proud she was. She also mentioned that the Coast Guard was considering creating a new civilian training program for community water safety, and they wanted Cynthia to help develop it. It was an exciting opportunity. Cynthia would not have to rejoin the Coast Guard or give up her life in Stonewood. She could consult part-time, helping to create a program that would train civilians in water rescue and safety techniques. It would be a way to use her expertise to help people on a larger scale. She accepted the opportunity. Over the following months, she worked with Coast Guard officials to develop the training program. It was challenging and rewarding work, bringing together her decades of experience with modern training methods and technologies. Meanwhile, life in Stonewood continued. Spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and the return of tourists to Miller's Lake. Cynthia's fishing hut was busy again. Her safety classes continued to grow. The 6 teenagers she had saved were finishing high school and preparing for college, all still committed to careers in public service. One beautiful May afternoon, Cynthia was on the dock repairing a fishing rod when she saw a familiar car pull up. It was Linda Chen, Michael's sister, whom she had met the previous summer. Linda got out of the car and walked toward the dock with a big smile. "Cynthia," she called. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced." "Of course not," Cynthia said, standing up. "It's wonderful to see you." They hugged, and Linda looked around at the lake. "This is beautiful," she said. "I can see why you love it here." "Would you like to go out on the lake?" Cynthia asked. "I can show you around." "I'd love that," Linda said. They got into Cynthia's boat and headed out onto the water. It was a perfect day, sunny and warm with a gentle breeze. The lake was calm and blue, reflecting the sky. They drove slowly, and Cynthia pointed out landmarks and told Linda about the area. "I saw your documentary," Linda said. "It was wonderful. You were so honest and brave. Michael would have been so proud of you." "Thank you," Cynthia said. "Talking about what happened was hard, but I think it was important. Maybe it will help other people who are dealing with similar guilt." "It already has," Linda said. "I've received messages from other families who lost loved ones in Coast Guard or military accidents. They said your story helped them understand what their loved ones went through and gave them permission to move forward." They stopped in the middle of the lake and just sat there, floating, talking about life and loss and healing. Linda told Cynthia more stories about Michael, and Cynthia shared more memories of their time working together. It was therapeutic for both of them, a way of honoring Michael's memory, while also acknowledging that life goes on. "You know," Linda said, "I think Michael brought us together for a reason. You needed to hear that we didn't blame you, and I needed to know that his death meant something, that it was part of a larger mission that saved many other lives. We both needed that closure." "I think you're right," Cynthia said. "Thank you for reaching out to me. It changed my life." As summer arrived in full force, Stonewood prepared for another festival. This year's summer festival would be even bigger than usual, with special activities celebrating community heroes. Cynthia had been asked to give a keynote speech at the opening ceremony. She was nervous about it, but also excited. She had important things to say, messages she wanted to share with the community that had given her so much. The festival opened on a beautiful July evening. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with clear skies and a gentle breeze. The whole town gathered on Main Street for the opening ceremony. A stage had been set up, decorated with bunting and flowers. The mayor introduced Cynthia, speaking about her contributions to Stonewood and her heroic rescue of the previous summer. Then Cynthia walked onto the stage to loud applause. She looked out at the crowd and saw so many familiar faces. Her friends from the card game group, Tom from the hardware store, the teenagers she had saved and their families, Margaret with her kind smile, all the people who had accepted her and supported her. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you for this honor. Last year, when I came to this festival, I was just the fishing hut owner. I had a secret, a past I was trying to forget. But then something happened that changed everything. 6 young people got into trouble on the lake, and I had to make a choice. I could stay safe on shore, or I could use the skills I had been hiding to help them." She paused, looking at the teenagers in the crowd. "I chose to help, and in doing so, I revealed who I really was. I was afraid of how you would all react. Would you think differently of me? Would you still accept me? But you all showed me incredible kindness. You embraced me and my past. You made me feel like I belonged here even more than before. I want to talk to you tonight about fear and courage. For 20 years, I lived in fear. I was afraid of my past, afraid of my memories, afraid of failing again. That fear kept me hiding, kept me from fully engaging with life. But when those kids needed help, I realized that real courage is not about never being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. Each of us has fears. Each of us carries regrets. Each of us has made mistakes. But we can't let those things define us. We can't let fear keep us from living fully, from using our gifts to help others, from being the people we're meant to be. Stonewood taught me that. You all taught me that. You showed me that community means accepting each other completely, with all our flaws and fears and failures. You showed me that it's okay to be imperfect, as long as we keep trying to do good. So, my message tonight is simple. Don't hide who you are. Don't run from your past. Don't let fear stop you from using your gifts. We all have something to offer. We all have skills and experiences that can help others. And when we share those gifts, when we help each other, we create something beautiful. A community where everyone belongs and everyone matters. She looked around at all the faces watching her. Thank you for being that kind of community. Thank you for accepting me. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to come home, to be yourself, to start again. I'm honored to be part of Stonewood, and I promise to keep using my skills to serve this community and to help keep everyone safe. The crowd erupted in applause. People were wiping tears from their eyes. Cynthia stepped down from the stage, and immediately people surrounded her, hugging her, thanking her, telling her how moved they were by her words. The festival continued with music and food and games and laughter. Cynthia spent the evening with her friends, enjoying the celebration, feeling truly at home for the first time in 20 years. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer running. She was exactly where she belonged. The following year brought more changes. Cynthia's involvement with the Coast Guard's civilian training program expanded. She traveled occasionally to training facilities to teach courses and help refine the curriculum. She enjoyed this work. It allowed her to stay connected to her Coast Guard roots while maintaining her life in Stonewood. The Water Safety Education Fund she had established with the money from the grateful parents grew significantly. Other people in Stonewood contributed to it, and word spread to neighboring communities. The fund provided free safety training and equipment to hundreds of people throughout the region. Lives were being saved because people were better prepared. Cynthia also wrote a book. It was a practical guide to water safety and emergency response, based on her decades of experience. The book included personal stories, technical information, and step-by-step instructions for various emergency scenarios. It was published by a small press and became popular in communities near lakes and rivers. But most importantly, Cynthia had found peace. The nightmares still came occasionally, but less frequently than before. When they did come, she had strategies for dealing with them. She had a therapist she talked to regularly. She had a support network of friends. She had purpose and meaning in her life. One summer evening, 2 years after the rescue, Cynthia was sitting on her dock watching the sunset. The lake was golden in the evening light, perfectly calm. A few boats were out on the water, their occupants enjoying the beautiful evening. She could hear laughter and music from the town. Everything was peaceful. She thought about how far she had come. 20 years ago, she had arrived in Stonewood broken and afraid, running from her past. She had hidden who she was, built walls around herself, tried to forget everything that had happened. But hiding had not healed her. It had just delayed the healing. The real healing had begun when she stopped hiding, when she used her skills to save those teenagers, when she opened up about her past, when she reconnected with her old life and integrated it with her new life, when she accepted that she was both the Coast Guard captain and the fishing hut owner, and that both identities had value. She heard footsteps on the dock and turned to see Josh walking toward her. He was home from college for the summer, studying emergency management just as he had said he would. He often stopped by to visit. "Hey, Miss Cynthia," he said, sitting down next to her. "Beautiful evening." "It is," she agreed. "How's school going?" "Great," Josh said. "I'm learning so much, and I keep telling my professors about you. They're impressed by everything you've done. Some of them want to use your book in their courses." Cynthia smiled. That would be nice. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the water. Then Josh said, "I want to ask you something. Do you ever regret it? Leaving the Coast Guard, coming here, spending 20 years in hiding?" Cynthia thought about it. "No," she finally said. "I needed those 20 years. I needed time to heal, to find peace, to build a new life. If I had stayed in the Coast Guard right after the tragedy, I probably would have broken completely. Coming here saved me." "But you could have done so much more if you'd stayed," Josh said. "You could have saved so many more lives." "Maybe," Cynthia said. "But I wasn't capable of saving anyone back then. I was too damaged. I needed to heal first. And besides, I did save lives here. I saved you and your friends. I've taught hundreds of people water safety. I've helped develop training programs that will save people for years to come. My path was different than I expected, but it brought me exactly where I needed to be." Josh nodded, understanding. "You're wise, you know that?" Cynthia laughed. "I'm old, it's different." "No, seriously," Josh insisted. "You taught me that it's okay to make mistakes, to fail, to need time to recover. You taught me that strength is not about never falling down, it's about getting back up." "You learned that well," Cynthia said. "You and your friends all did. I'm proud of all of you." As the summer progressed, Cynthia received a phone call that surprised her. It was from the Coast Guard. They wanted to present her with a commendation for her rescue of the 6 teenagers. They were hosting a regional ceremony to honor civilians who had performed exceptional rescues, and they wanted to include her. Cynthia was hesitant. She had not been part of the Coast Guard for 2 decades. She was not sure she deserved this recognition. But her friends in Stonewood convinced her to accept. It would be a good thing, they said. A way of finally acknowledging her service and her continued commitment to saving lives. The ceremony was held at a Coast Guard facility in a nearby city. Cynthia drove there on a sunny September morning, feeling nervous but also curious. She had not been on a Coast Guard base in 20 years. When she arrived, she was greeted by Admiral James Foster, the regional commander. He shook her hand warmly and thanked her for coming. "Captain Rhodes," he said, "it's an honor to meet you. Your record in the Coast Guard was exemplary, and what you did for those teenagers was extraordinary. We're proud to recognize your continued service to your community." "Thank you, sir," Cynthia said. "But I'm not a captain anymore. I haven't been for 20 years. Once a Coast Guard officer, always a Coast Guard officer," the Admiral said with a smile. "The skills and dedication don't disappear just because you're not active duty." The ceremony was held in a large hall. There were about 100 people present, mostly Coast Guard personnel and their families. Several civilians were being honored for various rescues. Cynthia sat with the other honorees, feeling out of place in her civilian clothes among all the uniforms. When it was her turn, the Admiral called her to the front and read a citation describing her rescue of the 6 teenagers. He spoke about her 20 years of service in the Coast Guard and the lives she had saved during that time. Then he presented her with a medal and a certificate. "Captain Cynthia Rhodes," he said, "for exemplary courage and dedication to saving lives, both during your active service and in your civilian life, the United States Coast Guard is proud to present you with this Civilian Commendation Medal." The audience applauded. Cynthia accepted the medal, feeling a mix of emotions. Pride, certainly, but also sadness for the people she had not been able to save. Gratitude for this recognition, and a sense of completion, of a circle closing. After the ceremony, several Coast Guard officers came up to talk to her. Some of them had heard stories about her from the old days. They thanked her for her service and asked about her current work. She told them about her safety training programs and her consulting work. They were impressed and encouraged her to continue. One officer, a young woman about 30 years old, approached her with tears in her eyes. "Captain Rhodes," she said, "I just want to thank you. I saw your documentary. Your story helped me deal with something that happened on one of my missions. Someone died, and I blamed myself. But hearing you talk about guilt and forgiveness and moving forward, it helped me so much." Cynthia took the young woman's hand. "I'm glad it helped," she said. "Remember that you can't save everyone. Sometimes things go wrong no matter what you do. But that doesn't make you a failure. It makes you human. Keep doing your best. That's all any of us can do." The young woman nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you. I'll remember that." On the drive back to Stonewood, Cynthia thought about that conversation. She had spent 20 years thinking her story was one of failure, but maybe it was actually a story of resilience. A story of someone who experienced tragedy, fell apart, and then slowly, painfully put herself back together. A story of redemption and healing. Maybe her story could help other people who were struggling with similar guilt and loss. Maybe that was the real value of what she had been through. Not the missions she had led or the lives she had saved, but the lessons she had learned about human frailty and strength, about failure and forgiveness. When she got back to Stonewood, she went directly to her fishing hut. It was late afternoon, and the sun was still warm. She walked out onto the dock and looked at the lake. This place had been her refuge for 20 years. It had given her space to heal, a community to belong to, and purpose to sustain her. She thought about Michael and Sarah and David and James, her crew members who had died in that storm so long ago. She hoped they knew that she had not given up, that she had continued fighting in her own way to save lives and serve others, that their legacy lived on in the work she did, in the people she taught, in the community she had helped protect. "I'm okay now," she whispered to the wind, to the water, to their memories. "It took a long time, but I'm okay. I hope you're proud." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees around the lake. It felt like an answer, like acceptance, like peace. 5 years after that summer rescue, Stonewood celebrated its 150th anniversary. The town organized a big celebration with parades, historical exhibits, and special events. As part of the celebration, the town decided to honor citizens who had made significant contributions to the community. Cynthia Rhodes, now 71 years old, was the first person honored. A plaque was installed near the lake, at the spot where she had launched her rescue mission 5 years earlier. The plaque read, "In honor of Captain Cynthia Rhodes, United States Coast Guard, retired." For 25 years, Captain Rhodes dedicated her life to saving others at sea. After settling in Stonewood, she continued her service through education and community support. On July 20th, she risked her life to rescue 6 young people from Miller's Lake. Her courage, skill, and dedication exemplify the best of our community. May her example inspire future generations to serve others with similar commitment. The unveiling ceremony was attended by hundreds of people. All 6 of the teenagers Cynthia had saved were there, now adults pursuing their careers in public service. Josh Miller had become an emergency management coordinator. Katie was working as a Coast Guard officer herself. Mark was a firefighter. Lisa was a paramedic. Ryan had joined the Navy. Jennifer was teaching water safety to children. They all stood together during the ceremony, along with their families. When the plaque was unveiled, they were the first to applaud. Then they came forward one by one to hug Cynthia and thank her again for giving them the chance to live these lives. "We wouldn't be here without you," Josh said simply. "Everything we've done, every person we've helped, every life we've saved, it's all because you saved us first." Cynthia looked at these 6 successful young people and felt overwhelming pride. They had taken the second chance she gave them and used it to make the world better. That was the real legacy of that day on the lake. After the ceremony, there was a reception at the community center. Cynthia spent hours talking to people, accepting their congratulations, sharing stories. Margaret was there, still bringing cookies even at 92 years old. Tom Harrison was there with his grandchildren. Linda Chen had come from out of state to attend. Maria Santos, Cynthia's old Coast Guard colleague, had driven up for the event. Late in the afternoon, as the reception was winding down, Cynthia slipped away. She walked down to her fishing hut, to the dock where she had spent so many peaceful mornings over the past 25 years. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The lake was calm and beautiful. She sat on the edge of the dock, her feet dangling over the water, and reflected on her life. She had experienced tragedy and triumph, failure and redemption, despair and hope. She had hidden and then emerged. She had broken and then healed. She had run away and then come home. It had been a long journey, but she was grateful for all of it, even the painful parts, because all of it had led her here, to this moment, to this place, to this life she had built. She was at peace. A boat pulled up to the dock, interrupting her thoughts. It was Katie in her Coast Guard uniform. She was on duty, patrolling the lake as part of a regional partnership program that Cynthia had helped establish. "Hey, Captain Rhodes," Katie called out with a grin. She still called Cynthia by her old rank. "Just checking in. Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," Cynthia said. "Beautiful evening." "It is," Katie agreed. "I'm about to finish my patrol. Want to come out for a quick ride, like old times?" Cynthia smiled. "I'd love to." She climbed into the Coast Guard boat, and Katie pulled away from the dock. They headed out onto the lake, the boat cutting smoothly through the water. The evening air was warm and pleasant. The sky was turning from gold to pink to purple as the sun sank lower. "You know," Katie said as they drove, "I think about that day all the time, the day you saved us. I remember being so scared, thinking I was going to die. And then I saw you coming through the storm and I knew everything would be okay, because you were there and you knew what to do." "I was scared too," Cynthia admitted. "I hadn't done anything like that in 20 years. I wasn't sure I still could." "But you did," Katie said. "And you inspired me to join the Coast Guard myself. I want to be like you, someone who steps up when people need help." "You're already doing that," Cynthia said. "I'm proud of you." They reached the middle of the lake and stopped, letting the boat drift. The sun was almost down now, just a sliver of gold on the horizon. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. The lake reflected everything, doubling the beauty. "This is my favorite time of day," Cynthia said softly, "when everything is quiet and peaceful, when you can just be." "I understand why you love this place," Katie said. "It's special." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the last of the sunset. 2 Coast Guard officers, one retired and one active, connected by a shared commitment to saving lives, enjoying a perfect moment on calm waters. As the sun finally disappeared and darkness fell, Katie started the engine again. "We should head back," she said. "I need to finish my report." They drove back to the dock slowly, neither in a hurry to end this moment. When they arrived, Cynthia climbed out of the boat carefully. Her knees were stiffer than they used to be. Age was catching up with her, but she was still strong and capable. "Thank you for the ride," she said to Katie. "Thank you for everything," Katie replied. "For saving us, for teaching us, for being an example of what we should aspire to be." After Katie left to finish her patrol, Cynthia walked slowly back toward town. The streetlights were coming on, casting a warm glow. She could hear music from someone's house, laughter from a backyard gathering. All the normal sounds of a summer evening in a small town. She thought about tomorrow. She would open the fishing hut in the morning. She would help some customers, maybe do a little fishing herself. She would teach a safety class in the afternoon. In the evening, she would meet her friends for their weekly card game. It was a simple life, a quiet life. But it was a good life, a meaningful life. And that was enough. After everything she had been through, all the adventures and tragedies and triumphs, she had learned that simple contentment was the greatest achievement. To wake up each morning without fear, to spend each day doing useful work, to connect with people who cared about her, to go to bed each night at peace. That was success. She had been a Coast Guard captain. She had saved countless lives at sea. She had lost people she cared about. She had run away and hidden. She had found a new home. She had saved lives again. She had taught and inspired others. She had healed. Now, at 71, she was simply Cynthia Rhodes, a woman who lived in Stonewood, who owned a fishing hut on Miller's Lake, who had a past she was no longer ashamed of, and a present she was grateful for. As she walked home through the familiar streets, greeting neighbors and enjoying the warm evening, she felt profoundly content. This was her life. This was her home. This was where she belonged. The quiet waters of Miller's Lake had given her refuge when she needed it. They had given her peace and purpose. They had given her a second chance. And she had taken that chance and used it to make a difference, to help others, to build something good. The journey from the rough ocean of her Coast Guard days to the calm lake of her retirement had been long and difficult. But it had been worth it. Every step, every challenge, every moment of pain and healing had been worth it. Because now she was whole, not perfect. She still carried scars, still had difficult days, still remembered the losses, but whole, complete, at peace. The hero of quiet waters had found her home. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.